I'm joined as always by Steve, the cricket guy. Hiya.
Hey, Mac, how you doing? Good
Yeah,
to see
not
you.
too bad, not too bad. Good to see you too. And we're going to talk about some good cricket. It's been an exciting week since we last spoke. For anyone who's joining, this is going to be a weekly show, and we're going to be doing this every Wednesday live at 8 p.m. That will be streaming live, and then we'll put out the podcast the day after. So anybody who can't be here for this live streaming, which people have got stuff to do, they can listen to it thereafter. So welcome to the show if you're listening to this or watching the show. So we're going to talk about first of all Australia against India. Oh my God, it's all going off. The cricket's supposed to be a gentleman's sport. Oh my God! And here we are talking about some situations. So let's talk about the first one. So first of all, I'll have to say this. I had to say this. Old habits die hard. So we've got Steve Smith doing some stuff. Do you want to fill everyone in on what's happening there? And what's your thoughts on it as a fan?
Yeah. So Steve Smith was caught on the stump cam during the break in play. What looked like he was rubbing his feet on the crease to kind of rub out the Indian batsman's mark. So, when they're lining up where to bat, it's obviously very important that they know where they're standing in relation to their stumps, and different batsmen will have a different way of standing, either on middle stump or off stump or leg stump or some combination of those, and to different bowlers and so on. So it's obviously really important for the batsman, and it's a kind of, you don't interfere with another batsman's mark. That's pretty low. But it looked on the screen like Smith was dragging his feet and trying to disrupt that. And I think it was the former Indian batsman Virender Sehwag, I think, who put some comments up on Twitter saying, "Oh, this is outrageous, and he's obviously destroying the mark, and that's a bad thing to do." And that got a lot of traction. I think he's got a huge Twitter following with Indian cricket fans, not surprisingly. So it looked pretty bad. However, Smith afterwards maintained that wasn't what he was doing, and Tim Paine, the Australian captain, also said that he was, he's a very idiosyncratic guy. What he was doing is he was standing at the crease and he was making movements as if he was batting to try and help him work out where to tell Nathan Lyon, the spin bowler, where to bowl, and he was trying to visualize that to help his bowlers, and the Australians maintain he didn't do it. So I don't know. I read it was quite an interesting article this morning by an Australian journalist called Jeff Lemon, who was saying, "Look, come on, day 5 of a Test match where the sun has been beating down on the pitch, that is like clay, right? The crease is like clay. A little drag of the foot, maybe on the first morning in England when it's damp, you could destroy somebody's mark, but on the 5th day like that, you're not going to do that." And anyway, what happened, if you keep watching on stump cam, when play came back together, the batsman came back. He immediately, the first thing he did as he was resetting was he asked the umpire for his guard again, and he just he got his guard and he got on with it. So, what I think, as you said it at the outset, Mac, this question of old habits die hard. I think if it wasn't for Sandpaper Gate a couple of years back, where Smith was involved in using some sandpaper on the ball, and it all really blew up in their face, and he obviously was distraught. And I don't think if that had happened, people would be making too much of this. I think people are reading into it a bit more. I don't know. It's difficult to know. I mean, it doesn't look good from the footage. But I kind of think there is something compelling to say that, well, actually he's a bit of an idiosyncratic character, and it is the kind of thing that would be in character for him to do, to kind of stand there and play, and pretend he was batting and see if he could help his bowlers by visualizing where the ball would pitch. So I don't know. Only Steve Smith probably knows what he was really doing, but I think it just speaks to the slightly heightened atmosphere around the Test matches. Now, obviously, there's been some unsavoury things in the crowds around the Test matches in this series. But even leaving that aside, I think clearly, I would say these look like two teams that don't particularly like one another, and know that they're struggling to beat the other team. And I think within that, it means that they're on the pitch. The rivalry is really heightened. So I think possibly the tourists are looking for that, but the Australians with the way they behave haven't necessarily made people give them a sympathetic reading of things. It's difficult to know, but it didn't look good.
But as far as the game itself, or the test itself, and all the tests, obviously that was the third one. What's your kind of thoughts about it? Was it good cricket?
Oh, it was a phenomenal test match. Yeah, I mean the series has been phenomenal. You've kind of had everything so far, from India's massive collapse to them roaring back and winning the test after. But this was
Okay.
really one of those things. Was the beauty of a 5-day test.
Yeah.
It got down to the last day, and although India were very unlikely to win, the question was, would Australia get over the line, or would India hold out for the draw? I remember sending you a message in the week saying it looks like Australia are probably going to win, but India might get a draw. So it was great to see that India managed to get a draw. So the way the test unfolded, first innings Australia scored 338, 340, something of that nature, which is is a competitive score. You can bowl to that, but they would have been looking for more.
Right.
Steve Smith got he got 100, and Marnus Labuschagne. And it seems the Australian commentators are calling him Labuschagne now. There was a while where people called him Labuschagne, but I think we've all settled on Labuschagne.
Okay.
Yeah, Labuschagne got 90 as well. So the engine room, the number 3 and number 4 of the Australian batting team got some runs. Pucovski, I think, did okay as well at the top of the order. Warner came in and he was back as well, and don't think he got that many, but it was good to have him back. So a decent total for Australia. India had a bat and they got 220, so Australia well in the lead at kind of the halfway point of the test after both sides had batted. Australia would be feeling pretty happy. They then scored 300 again themselves, and again Smith and Labuschagne scored runs. They got an 80 and a 70 respectively again. So you're looking at setting a target of 400. Australia really in the box seat. But that's when the game went into the final day. India were about 100 runs on the board, 2 wickets down. Pujara and Rahane were batting, so they're very experienced number 3 batsmen, and the guy captaining in the absence of Kohli. And it's when the pressure turned from India over the course of the day and went right on the Australians. It was some really, really interesting batting. What's really funny, actually, if you look back, they scored 334 for 5 in 131 overs to save the test. And although you look at that and there was some pretty sedate batting towards the end of the day, actually they scored those runs at a faster rate than they scored the runs in the first innings, which is quite interesting. But nonetheless, lots of real digging in. So Pujara, who came in on the second day, Rahane was out very quickly, but Pujara batted for a total of about 4.25 hours to score 77. Pant, the wicketkeeper, came in and he scored a much more brisk 97, just fell short of his 100, and he scored that he was going at about 80 runs per 100 balls. But then you got kind of the last 2 guys in. Vihari, batsman, under a bit of pressure to keep his place in the team. He hadn't done a lot in the series so far, had a pulled hamstring, so couldn't run. He kind of hung around for a very long time and scored an epic 23. It doesn't sound like a lot, but he scored that in 161 balls. That's what's that? 18 runs per 100 balls or something. So very, very slow. Pretty much just scored his runs in boundaries. I think he scored 3 fours or something in there, 4 fours. So he wasn't running. He was just keeping the ball out and just frustrating the Australians. And he was joined. Sorry, Matt.
No, go on, carry on.
Yeah, he was joined by Ashwin, the spinner, who was pretty slow. He scored 39 in 3 hours and 128 balls, but compared to Vihari, he was going at a rate of knots. But they batted together for 43 overs to see out the test. That's a phenomenal effort from 2 batsmen, and that's when the pressure got on the Australians, and that's when you started to see some of the behaviour. Tim Payne behind the stumps, the captain, he's been pretty much a model pro since he took over the Australian captaincy in the wake of the Sandpaper Gate stuff. He was the one they put in as a calm, mature guy to captain the team. Well, he was caught on stump cam, really giving Ashwin some verbals and really sledging
Okay.
Yeah, but he dropped 3 catches. He dropped catches in the innings, and he afterwards, he said himself that he let his bowlers down. I mean, 3 extra wickets in that game would have made all the difference. So, I think that last day the Australians were really pressing to win. India were holding out, and it put the Australians under real pressure. So I think going forward into the final test in Brisbane, I think there are some injuries. So Vihari won't play in that test. His hamstring won't allow it. And in fact, they also reckon he's out for the England tour, which is coming up fairly shortly, a tour of India as well.
Yeah.
So that's a shame for him. I've read that Jasprit Bumrah, the fast bowler, might be injured as well. So India got some problems with selection perhaps for the final test. But Australia as well, you got to ask. Their quick bowlers all bowled somewhere around 40 to 50 overs in the test match. Nathan Lyon bowled something like 70, 75 overs in the test match. That's a lot of work to go through in the hot Australian, kind of time. So it's obviously the height of summer in Australia. So, question for me is: will Australia go into the next test with a pretty much an unchanged team? Pucovski, the young opening batsman, he may have an injured shoulder as well, and he might have to sit out, which might mean Matthew Wade goes back to open the batting with Warner, and Travis Head comes back in the middle order. But will they do anything with their bowling attack? You've got to be tempted to keep going with Stark and Cummins and Hazelwood and Lyon because they're all such great bowlers. But fatigue, how will they be bowling on day 4 and day 5 of the test match at the Gabba in Brisbane? Will they be able to do it, or will it be an opportunity even for a depleted India team to remarkably take the series 2-1? I don't know.
Well, what's your thoughts though? I mean, you said about obviously the heat, talk about the injuries. If I mean, we like your predictions, and you've been pretty good at them. So
not bad.
Not bad at all. So, in your opinion, what's your thought? Who's going to win it?
I think you've got to be brave to discount Australia at home. Okay. I think Australia at home will probably have enough to win the test, but India, several times in this series have kind of upset the odds. Have responded when you wouldn't expect them to, have taken a session or a day when you wouldn't expect them to. So again, this is probably, these are two very, very evenly matched teams going at it really hard, both wanting to win. The Indians have said already that the draw in Sydney felt like a win. It felt like they won the game because they got over the line. So they will be going in quite buoyed up. Day one could be really important. Whoever gets on top at the end of the first day will get the momentum. But I think on balance, Australia, assuming that their bowling attack is fit enough to play in this game, I think they'll probably just have enough. And that the Australian determination to see them home will probably do the job.
Okay, good. So we'll come back to that. So well done. So we're predicting Australia. Obviously, they're at home, so obviously a home advantage. So we'll see what happens. So obviously, there's been some other Australian cricket going on, but it's not been obviously this test. What else has been going on in Australia?
Yeah, well, it's running the same time as the Big Bash. So although the downside for the Big Bash is the Australian Test team and the big stars like Smith and Warner and the bowlers we've been talking about can't play in the Big Bash, there's still been some pretty interesting and some pretty exciting cricket. So I've been keeping a little tally of how the English or county players have been getting on in Australia and in the Big Bash, and it's been quite an interesting week for some of the players in the Big Bash. So looking at the batting, because there's been a bit more batting from English players than there has been bowling, but first of all looking at the batting, so looking at all batsmen who've had a minimum of 3 innings in the Big Bash this year, and I think most teams have now played somewhere around 10 games in total, maybe 8, 9, 10 games in total. Number one English batsman out there is still Alex Hales. He scored 323 runs, which is the second highest total in the Big Bash cumulatively. He's had 10 innings, so he's scoring 32 runs every time he goes out to bat, which is a top 10 figure. And his strike rate of 161 runs per 100 balls is also a top 10 figure. So he's my number one English batsman out there. I make him rank 4th overall. And so he's doing pretty well, and he can be pretty pleased with himself.
That's pretty consistent, because talked about him last week, and he's not dropped his form at all.
No, I mean, his numbers have gone down slightly, perhaps. I think what was he doing last time? He was scoring 34 every time he went out to bat. So it's dropped down to 32. But over the course of a week where he's probably played 3 times or something, that's pretty good going and pretty consistent. The next ranked guy, and also top 10 overall, but number 2 for English batsmen, is another well-known England player, Jason Roy. Often opens the batting for white ball cricket for England. He scored over 200 runs so far, so he's doing well. When he goes out to bat, he scores 35 runs a time when he goes out, which I make that 3rd overall. So he's doing very well when he goes out to bat. His strike rate of 126, so 126 runs per 100 balls, sounds quick, and it would be in other contexts, but in the Big Bash, that's actually fairly middling. So he's not exactly slow, but it's kind of middle of the pack. So overall, 10th ranked batsman for me, but the number 2 England or English-based player. And then number 3, somebody who's really jumped up the rankings in the last week is Sam Billings. So I like Sam Billings a lot. We've spoken on Sports Fans TV about how I'd like to see Sam Billings in the England white ball team. I think he's a terrific player. So he's now the 3rd ranked Englishman with about overall 22nd. So there's about over 90 batsmen that have played more than 3 innings. So being a top 25 is pretty good going. He hasn't had as many opportunities to bat, so he's only scored 137 runs, which is not bad. When he goes out to bat, he's scoring about 23 runs a time, which again sounds a bit lower, but you have to remember that Hales and Roy go in at the top of the innings, so get 20 overs to bat. Billings often comes in at number 5, number 6, so doesn't have quite as long to bat. But his strike rate of 137 runs per 100 balls. In fact, funnily enough, he's faced exactly 100 balls and he scored 137 runs. So, wow. But he's really leapt up. He's made more appearances this last week than he had done previously, and I think he's starting to cement his place in the. I think he plays for one of the Sydney teams. So he's doing pretty well. And another guy who'll be pleased with how far he's jumped up and kind of come into the reckoning is Phil Salt. Now, he's a Sussex opening batsman. He's never played for England. He hasn't had any international recognition. So he's also scored over 200 runs. And he's scoring 22 runs every time he goes out to bat. So similar to Billings. And his strike rate's very similar as well. He's going at 133 runs per 100 balls. So overall, I rank him 27th in the 4 lists and the 4th ranked Englishman. So he'll be pretty pleased because he's actually jumped up above David Malan, who's the 5th ranked Englishman. Now, last week I had Malan in the top 10 overall. I thought he was doing really well. But I actually now have him dropped down to 28th in my overall ranking. He's had a pretty poor week, whereas before he was scoring 39 runs every time he went out to bat. That's dropped down to 29 runs. He's had a pretty lean spell, and his strike rate is still not great. His strike rate before was not terrific. His strike rate now is 113 runs per 100 balls. So again, he's often come in at times where his franchise Hobart have lost an early wicket, and he's had to come in and face people very early on, and he's obviously had to do a little bit of a repair job. Doesn't want to get straight out, which affects his strike rate. But nonetheless, he'll be thinking this week, I've not had a great week this week. I'll be wanting to kick on. So I'll make those the top ones. An interesting one to note as well, though, is the guy having 7th below Joe Clark, who an English player, hasn't played in the last week. I think he may even have left the Big Bash now. It's James Vince, but James Vince is in 7th, so he's his runs every time he goes out to bat is just over 20, and his strike rate is 125. And actually, he'll be pretty disappointed with that. I think he's had plenty of innings. He's batted 10 times, so he's had plenty of chances at the crease, and he would normally bat at number 3 as well. So he would often have quite a good opportunity to score runs, but it's just not happening for him in this Big Bash so far. So interesting times where some players are really taking the opportunity. Hales, I would say, Roy, and now increasingly Billings and Salt. Whereas maybe one or two others are just dropping off a little, and we'll be hoping for a better week next week.
Yeah. What about the bowlers?
Well, bowlers is not quite as rosy a picture, I'd have to say, for the county stalwarts over in the Big Bash. The number 1 ranked bowler, funnily enough, is still Liam Livingstone, because he's taken 1 wicket in the 1 over he bowled. So his strike rate is phenomenal.
Doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, it doesn't really get much better than that. So, excluding him, because he's only bowled the 1 over, even though he has taken a wicket, the top-ranked English bowler is Danny Briggs, and we spoke about him last week. He's a left-arm spinner from Sussex. He's averaging 29. He's economy rate of under 8, which is okay, and his strike rate of a wicket every 22 balls is kind of middling stuff. I'd have to say again, he was ranked overall 27th last week, but this week I have him ranked in 45th. So he's kind of dropped through the rankings a little bit, and I think this is a little bit of a story for the England bowlers in the Big Bash. 2nd ranked bowler, and I was surprised to see him ranked 2nd, because every time I've watched and I've seen him bowl, it's gone pretty badly for him. Is an England bowler who's played Test and one-day cricket called Jake Ball from Nottinghamshire. His average is around 30, and his strike rate is taking the wicket every 15 balls, but his economy rate is up to nearly 12. It's 11.7. So he's going at nearly 2 runs a ball. I mean, that's a that's not good. That's a pretty poor economy rate. So he's
Yeah.
right the way down in 59th overall, and that's where the second ranked England bowler is in my ranking. What I've done with my ranking is I've just equally weighted the average, the economy rate, and the strike rate, just to take an kind of an amalgamation of those figures.
Yeah, yeah.
The third ranked bowler is a guy who hasn't played for a few weeks, called Benny Howell. Plays for Gloucestershire. And he hasn't even taken a wicket. And
Oh
he's
my
our third ranked English
God.
bowler.
How can someone know he's not taking a wicket in the rankings?
Well, because although he comes right down the bottom of the average and the strike rate, because he hasn't taken a wicket, his economy rate is 7.2, so he's only going at just over a run a ball. He's doing pretty well in terms of when he did bowl. He hasn't bowled very much. He played 2 games and he hasn't bowled a huge amount. But what I think it means is for Lewis Gregory, who comes in below him in the rankings, and in fact Ball, Howell and Gregory are 59th, 60th and 61st on my ranking. Gregory, again, is average 31 with a ball. His economy rate is over 10. So again, he's getting a bit of Humpty every time he bowls as well. His strike rate is a wicket every 18 balls. So he's taking a wicket every 3 overs. So and again, when I've seen Gregory play, actually, I was surprised he wasn't higher in the batting rankings, because I've seen him have a bit of a swing and he's done quite well. But his bowling has often taken a little bit of a pounding when he's come into bowl. So again, there's none of these guys are doing terribly badly, but they'll be hoping for a bit of an uptick this week and making a little bit more of an impression. And I think if you're Jake Ball, you'll be hoping you don't keep sailing over the boundary like he has been. He's been getting quite a bit of punishment, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's painful. That's painful. As a fan, that must be extremely painful watching, especially for the English fan of the Big Bash.
Yeah, I see him coming into bowl, and you kind of will him to do well as representing county cricket, and he's a good bowler. He got in a test team, and he's played white ball cricket for England. He's a serious cricketer. He's a good player, but the Big Bash is pretty unforgiving. When the big hitters get going, and the guys that go score like Hales does at 160 runs per 100 balls, they don't hang about. If you put the ball anywhere near their slot, they're gonna put it away from ball one. These guys practice hitting the ball a long way, and they do range hitting, as they call it. So no mercy will be shown by his countrymen. I think when he's bowling to them, I think I've seen him get some tap from them as well.
And what can you put your finger on, as a fan, obviously, of why the English bowlers are so poor? There must be is it because they're not practicing enough? Is there just not enough quality, not enough depth? What can you kind of pinpoint anything?
Well, I think most of the England bowlers that have got a bowl have been pacemen, and I think one of the interesting things to look at is who's at the top of the bowling rankings. So at the very top at the moment is an Australian fast bowler called Jay Richardson, who is a kind of whippy, he's not a big tall guy. He's a short, stocky, runs in quite fast, bowls very fast kind of guy. He's a bit like, for cricket fans will remember, Brett Lee and Dale Steyn. He's that type of bowler rather than a big, tall, Pat Cummins, Steve Harmison kind of big guy like that.
Yeah.
He's been doing very well, taking wickets, being very economical. But actually, the next 5 bowlers on the ranking are all spinners. And so you've got Mujib Rahman, the Afghanistan young 19-year-old, who we've spoken about him before in the Cricket Fan Show. He's already played something like 60 times for Afghanistan, despite being only a teenager. He's doing very well. You've got Steve O'Keefe, who's an Australian spinner who's played couple of test matches, 4 or 5 test matches for Australia. He's a veteran. He's in his mid to late 30s now. He's doing very, very well. You've got Adam Zampa, who's another type of Australian spinner, quite a young guy. He's played some international cricket for Australia, and he's doing very well, as is Tanveer Sangha, who we spoke about last week, the young Australian, another kind of spinning prodigy. He's really near the top of my rankings. And then you've got my old mate Rashid Khan, the Afghanistan mega super spinner, who's one of my favourite players.
Yeah,
he's in there too. So if you're comparing who's doing well to the England retinue of bowlers, well, you'd probably have to say it points perhaps to England's lack of ability to sell spinners into the BBL. Danny Briggs is doing very well in terms of getting a game and playing out there, and he's doing okay and he's holding his own. But other than that, there aren't really any English spinners that are out there trying to get a game. And maybe that's because there's a fair few of them in and around the England Test team at the moment because of the tour to Sri Lanka, and a few of them are committed to that. But Yeah, it's interesting. I guess if Adil Rashid was out there, he would probably be. You would expect he would be quite near the top of the rankings if he were fancied a go in the Big Bash. But I think really it's a tough gig for pacemen out there. So for
Right.
Ball and Gregory and people like that, it's a hard yards. But for the spinners, if you're bowling, what they're the guys who seem to rise to the top in the Big Bash at the moment.
Okay.
And England just haven't got really their top spinners out in the Big Bash.
Yeah, no, that's good. Brilliant. Thank you for that. And so, moving away from the Big Bash and Australia in general, we've got England. The England team in Sri Lanka, right? Is it Sri Lanka? Yeah, Sri Lanka.
That's right. Yeah.
And they've got obviously they've had a few issues with. Is it Moeen Ali? What happened with Moeen Ali, by the way?
Yeah, I think Moeen tested positive for COVID when he landed in Sri Lanka, I think. So he was then obviously had to go through the COVID protocols. And Chris Wokes, who had shared a car with him to get to the airport, had also had to isolate and be tested a few times and stuff. So yeah, so Moeen is unavailable for the first test, and that may be significant for England.
Will he be missed as a fan? Would you miss him playing?
Well, it's an interesting tour for Moeen. I mean, Mo has really dropped out of the first team reckoning in the Test side for a little while. Yeah, he had a bit of a poor run. He didn't really do a great deal. He wasn't playing very well in the Test team. He was kept around in the one-day team and the white ball team, and he didn't really have a great summer for England with the bat or the ball. So I really think this was an opportunity for them to give Moeen another go, because Sri Lanka, you take spinners to Sri Lanka, and that's a place where they often do well. Right. So I think it was a real opportunity for Moeen to show that he can still play top class Test cricket, and it's a real shame for him that he's going to miss the first Test. But I think if he's fit, they would definitely want to give him a game in the second Test if available. But obviously, if he's missed time and he's had to isolate, and we've seen other sportsmen get COVID and some of them bounce back straight away. They have it very mild. Others, like Kai Havertz at Chelsea, a footballer, for example, who had it and was bedridden and has taken some time to come back to being at a standard. So we don't know how affected Moeen is at this point. Obviously, that's kind of personal and private information for him. But will be interesting to see, and I hope for him that he's in contention for the second Test. But then, of course, what happens in the first Test has a great bearing on the selections for the second Test. So it puts Moeen's ability to take an opportunity at a bit of risk, I think.
Yeah, because you said that obviously both Tests are in Gaul, and is it a typical spinner's wicket? What's the kind of thought on that?
Well, yeah, it kind of is, but I've had a bit of a look at the last few years of Tests at Gaul and just to see how that plays out. And what's really interesting is, the 2 out of every 3 overs bowled in a Test match since 2016 in Gaul is bowled by a spinner. Okay. Last time England were there, the England spinners took 16 wickets in the match. So you look at that and you go, yeah, this is a place where you play your spinners. Right. But actually, a third of the overs is not nothing, right? A third of the overs is like a session a day.
Yeah.
And actually, if you exclude that England Test, where England were even more spin heavy than most touring teams, and even possibly even more spin heavy than Sri Lanka, actually pacemen slightly outperform spinners. Certainly, there's not a lot in it in terms of the average, in terms of the strike rate, and in terms even of the economy rate. So I think there's possibly something interesting there at Gaul, that perhaps you could get sucked too far into thinking it's going to be a spinner's paradise and actually forget just how effective good fast bowling could be on that pitch as well. So bowlers like I think New Zealand's Tim Southey took wickets there. He's a very good quick bowler. So I think if you've got good pacemen, don't discount them. Sometimes you play on wickets in the subcontinent, and it's very much like a waste of time for the quick bowlers to be there. It's just like an absolute road. There's nothing in it for them, and all the wickets and all the bowling needs to be done by the spinners. Gaul, I'm not so sure, but nonetheless, when you're going to Sri Lanka, I think particularly if you look at the type of squad and the reserves that England have picked, I think they're probably still going to be leaning towards spin as a way to go. And it worked very well for them last time. They spun themselves to 3 Test wins last time. They weren't all at Gaul. They were Pakele and Colombo as well, I think. But Jack Leach, Moeen Ali, and Adil Rashid, they took 48 wickets between them in 3 Tests. Joe Root took one as well. they bowled nearly 80% of the overs in that tour for England. In fact, Leach and Moeen bowled more overs than all the seamers combined in that series. And in fact, Rashid was only a couple behind. The seamers bowled 101 overs and Rashid bowled 99. So, they had a clear plan last time, and that worked really well. So, given the makeup of the squad, I would expect England go there again. The other thing to say about the last tour there in 2018 was England batted very well. It was Ben Foakes, the wicketkeeper's first tour. He averaged 69. He got 150 in the 3 tests. And Johnny Bairstow came in. He scored 100 in his only test out there, and he also averaged 69. So England scored 400, 750s across the 3 test matches. So they batted very well, put runs on the board, and allowed the spinners to attack and therefore take wickets. So I guess they'll be looking to replicate that this time.
Yeah, and what's the conditions like? Is it like a dry heat or wet heat? I don't know. I've done anything about Sri Lanka.
Yeah, gosh. Well, I've been to Sri Lanka, but it's a very, very long time ago. I'm trying to remember how
why did you go there? Was it work?
I travelled a little in India and ended up my trip with a little bit of time in Sri Lanka. Not too much time, but it was a lovely place. And I think it's not so much the heat and the conditions; it's the pitches that I think tend to turn and bounce rather than help the fast bowlers. There's not a lot of seam movement on the pitches in Sri Lanka, where you get in places like England and New Zealand, where you get a bit of moisture in the grass, and that comes to the surface, and the bowlers can use that. I think in Sri Lanka it's much drier pitches, which tend to crack, and then you hit a crack and the ball will turn and spin rather than anything else. So. But I think England's squad is quite interesting. I think there's a couple of things to look out for with the England squad and in terms of how they pick. So I guess first question is, if they want to do three spin and 2 pace in terms of the bowling attack, Moeen being out is a big question. So if they're going to do that, obviously Jack Leach and Dominic Bess, the spinners in the kind of frontline spinners, they will play. They will definitely play. But then it's a question of which of the other spinners that they've taken as kind of spare men for the squad will they play? And there's 3 to choose from. They've got, as suggested by one of our viewers, Emma Frost, a couple of weeks ago, who was disappointed that Matt Parkinson, the Lancashire leg spinner, wasn't a full member of the squad and wasn't being given a full go. Well, opportunity knocks, I think, possibly here for Parkinson. He's 24 years old. He's quite a big spinner of the ball, and he's a wicket take. His average in first class cricket, he hasn't played any international cricket, but his average in first class cricket is just 25, which is really very good, and is a it's a start of a career, so it's not a huge sample size, but it's a very good base to go from, and I think he impresses many people that watch him with his ability to consistently turn the ball, which is no mean feat for a leg spinner. So there's another leg spinner around in the squad as well called Mason Crane. He's a little bit older, I believe he's older, I think, than Parkinson, or he's certainly around the same age. He already has a test match to his name. He was in an Ashes squad a couple of years ago, at the start of 2018, and unfortunately he didn't have a great debut. I mean, it was a tough tour to be on, and it didn't go very well for England in general, and it went pretty poorly for Crane. His match figures of 1 wicket for 193 is a pretty uncompromising debut, and I think the Australians, they see a young English leg spinner playing his debut test, they're going to go after him, and I think that's what happened in that test. So
they smell young blood. They smell young blood.
Yeah, they do. But it would of course be totally harsh and unfair to judge Crane's future career on the back of that one test. I think it was pretty unfair of England to throw him in at that point, as they've done that to young spinners a number of times over the years. But hopefully Crane will come again. But I'd have to say, I don't think he's really kicked on since the start of 2018. He's bowled a lot more in first class cricket, I think, but his average is up to around 45. So that's not anything to write home about. So I guess the England selectors must see something in him. Maybe it's a consistency or a durability of his action or something like that. Or his character in the field, perhaps, that they really like. But certainly, if you look at the raw numbers, you'd have to say that Parkinson looks like a better bet to have an international career as a leg spinner. But the third guy that they could choose is Amar Verdi. He's off spinner from Surrey. So obviously he plays for Surrey. So as any Middlesex fan will tell you, if you play for Surrey, you're going to get an England cap eventually, because everybody who plays for Surrey gets an England cap. But no, he's a good bowler. He's 22, so he's a young guy as well. And he's got a first class average of 28. I think he's very much a number 11 batsman, so I don't think he gives you much with a bat at all. If I'm not sure any of those guys give you a great deal with a bat. But I suppose, although perhaps England's plan may have been to play Moeen, Bess and Leach, which would have been two off spinners and a left arm spinner, I think it's pretty unlikely that they would go with Verdi in the Test team at this point, given that Bess is already there to bowl off spins. I think it's more likely if they do go, if they go with three spinners, given that Moeen is unavailable. I personally would go for Parkinson. I think it would be I'm a bit of a romantic, and I would like to see a young attacking leg spinner given a go. So I think that's where they will go if that's the way they go. But there's a second consideration, I think, for England as well, and that's the fact that they don't have Ben Stokes.
Right.
He's been rested from this tour, as we've been talking about. Obviously he's had a very difficult year with family illness and other things as well, and I think they're giving him a break, quite rightly so. But of course, Stokes is so integral to the balance of the side. In the last tour, in fact, he batted at number 5 in two of the tests, and number 3 in one of the others. But he also topped the bowling averages. He ended up being England's most effective bowler by average last time, and that was the balancing act. That meant they only had to pick 2 out and out fast bowlers, because they always had Stokes, who could bowl a share of the overs himself. So without Stokes, that means the England's side isn't quite as easy to balance as it might otherwise be. So that's made me wonder if perhaps what England will do is they will go and they'll use Joe Root as the third spinner, and perhaps somebody else to pick up the other overs as well. And they won't go for the 3 frontline spinners. They'll just go for the 2. So thinking about that, I think the way they might balance the side, and I'll run through the team I think they'll pick. It's not necessarily the one I would pick, but I think they'll pick. I think Sibley and Crawley, Dominic Sibley and Zach Crawley are pretty much a shoe-in to open the batting. I think that's going to happen. I think Johnny Bairstow will bat at 3. I think Bairstow, he gave up a Big Bash contract, a very lucrative Big Bash contract to go on this tour. I don't think Bairstow does that unless he's been given assurances that he's going to play. He's played 70 tests for England, so they know what they're getting. And again, he's got a reputation of being a good player against spin, which I guess they think they'll see a lot of in Sri Lanka. So I think Bairstow bats at 3, and then Joe Root can bat in his favoured number 4 position. Then I think Dan Lawrence of Essex will make his debut at number 5. I think that's quite likely. And again, he's a better than occasional off spinner as well. He can bowl. He's an okay bowler. So like Root, he can take up some of the overs if they needed 4 or 5 overs in a day just for somebody to give everybody else a rest. Lawrence would be able to do that. And I think Joss Buttler plays at number 6. He was in pretty good form at the end of last summer, I think. So he keeps his place, of course. And then I think they play Ben Foakes. So I don't think Buttler will keep wicket. I think Ben Foakes will. And I say that because if they think they're going to be bowling quite a lot of spin, and having 2 frontline spinners in the team in the modern Test match is a lot of spin, even if they don't need Root and Lawrence to bowl any more overs, you probably want your best wicket keeper. And I think by common consent, Ben Foakes is the best wicketkeeper available. He's behind the stumps. He's a very, very good wicketkeeper. And as he showed in Sri Lanka last time, he can score runs in these conditions. So they've got nothing to fear with him batting at number 7. Then into the bowlers, I think Chris Woakes will probably bat at number 8. I think he's I think he could bat at number 7, no problem. But so batting at 8, I think is pretty good. And I think England see him as a very reliable bowler who can bowl a lot of overs in a day and be pretty consistent and do a good job, and will keep going. And you need that. You need that in a team. Then I think Dominic Bess and Jack Leach, as we've said, will definitely play as 2 frontline spinners. And then I think Jimmy Anderson will probably come in at number 11 and open the bowling with Woakes as the kind of senior paceman. I think if it goes to plan, England may well swap Wokes and Anderson for Broad and Sam Curran for the second test. So
Okay.
they don't kind of flog their fast bowlers on too much, and they rotate them in the hot weather and so on.
Yeah.
And I think they sometimes like to leave Broad out of the first test so that when he comes in the second test, he's absolutely fired up and raring to go. It could be interesting to see what they do. They've done that once before and realised how much he dislikes it, so they might put him in the first test. But I think it's a bit of a toss up. But I think Jimmy will probably get the first test and Broad the second test, and then Wokes the first test and Curran the second test.
Brilliant.
So that's what I think England will do.
What about the Sri Lankan team? What's your thoughts about them?
Yeah, well, they're a good team and they've got good players, though perhaps they lack a little bit of consistency at test level sometimes. They've just come back from South Africa where they were pretty roundly thumped, I have to say. Their batting was okay, but they gave away a lot of runs, and I think that that possibly tells a story about the relative strengths of their team. As batsmen, Dimuth Karunaratne is a good left-handed opening batsman. He scored 100 in South Africa, but that was his first kind of score of any substance for about 9 or 10 test matches. So he was under a little bit of pressure to score. So is he a consistent run scorer at test level? Good question. Maybe England will find out. Similar as Kusal Perera, he is another top order batsman. He scored a couple of 50s in South Africa, so he'll be expecting to keep his place, I think, and play. Probably, I think the best batsman that Sri Lanka have is Dinesh Chandimal. He's played 60 tests. He's got nearly 4,000 test runs. He scored an 80 in South Africa, so again, he'll feel he's in good nick. But if you look at the list of his innings, he can sometimes run a little bit hot and cold, and sometimes runs with a few low scores on the trot, and then he gets a couple of good scores and then a few low scores. So it'll be interesting to see if he backs up his 80 or if he goes on a little bit of a run of low scores. I think it's probably the missing piece for Chandimal is a bit of consistency match to match. And then a guy who, I swear he's been playing Test cricket for the last 35 years. It's Angelo Matthews, the one-time Sri Lankan captain. I swear he's been playing since I was a boy. He seems to have been around forever. He's played about 90 Test matches. He's a bit of an old stager. Averages, I think, 45 with a bat. So he's a good middle-order batsman. He really knows what he's doing. And he's one of these bowlers. He doesn't take a lot of wickets, but he's one of those annoying kind of not very fast, medium-paced bowlers that's very difficult to score off. So it can be quite useful for bowling at one end whilst his captain attacks from the other end. So Matthews is a player I like, and I kind of never begrudge him doing well because he's certainly put in the yards to earn his good performances. He's been around a long time. Then I had a look at the bowling attack, and it was pretty difficult to pick out really players who I thought we ought to definitely look out for. There's a guy called Vishwa Fernando who's a left-arm quick bowler, and left-arm quick bowlers are always pretty interesting, and Sri Lanka have had some good ones over the years. Chaminda Vas, for example, was a good left-arm quick bowler. He took 5 for in one of the tests in South Africa, so again he'll be feeling in good nick. He'll be feeling like he's got a lot to offer. Again, I looked at his record in tests, and he tends to be a little bit expensive. He tends to go for 3.5, 4, 4.5, maybe even 5 and over. So again, can be difficult for a captain if he's not rattling through and taking wickets quickly. He can often maybe go for quite a few runs, and suddenly the scoreboard starts to move and the game starts to move away from a captain. So I guess Fernando will be looking to bowl a little bit tighter but continue to take wickets. But really, I think Sri Lanka are missing a real frontline spinner, and unless I'm missing something, I had a look, and I think they're probably their top spinner, their number one spinner is probably a chap called Lasith Mbuldenia. Now, he's been around a little while. He's played quite a lot of one-day cricket, I think. He's a slow left-arm bowler, and he's a wicket-taking bowler. He tends to take wickets, I think. But he missed the South Africa tour, I think, for injury. But I understand he's in contention for this England tour to Sri Lanka. Okay. He's probably the best known name amongst the Sri Lankan spinners, I think. There's a new fellow they brought in who did tour in South Africa, who again is in the squad. He's a De Silva, and every Sri Lankan team deserves a De Silva. There've been some great players called De Silva over the years, but PWH De Silva. He's a leg spinner, a young leg spinner. So we've been talking about leg spinners in the England side, and again, a young leg spinner. You're never quite sure what you're going to get. I think he did okay in South Africa. I think if I was the Sri Lankan selectors, I would probably like to see him again at home. So I think that he will play, but again, it's difficult to see a real outstanding frontline spinner like Sri Lankans have had for so many years, Muralitha and then Harath and so on. So I'm not sure who's going to really lead the charge with the spin in the spin department for them. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
Okay, good. So first test coming up. What's your prediction, Steve?
Well, I think England's batting tips the scales towards an England win in the first test.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think the way South Africa were able to score runs against Sri Lanka. Okay, we're in Sri Lanka, so it won't be quite the same. It will be the conditions the Sri Lankan bowlers are more used to. But that England lineup can score runs against spin, and I think they will do that. And then I think although the Sri Lankans have a good batting lineup, I think England's ability to score runs against the Sri Lankan bowling lineup will probably give England the edge. I'm pretty sure Sri Lanka will fancy their chances, and let's make no mistake, a tour to Sri Lanka's a difficult place to go, and not conditions that England players will be that used to, although many of them played there in 2018. They've only, I think, been about 16 or 17 tests in total, England touring teams in Sri Lanka, so it's not somewhere they're as used to going as they would be in Australia or South Africa or something. So there is a challenge there, but I think on balance, England's batting lineup looks strong and quite consistent, potentially quite exciting. And I think that will be enough to score good runs against the Sri Lankan attack. And then I think the England bowling attack has got enough to keep the Sri Lankan batting lineup kind of, behind the game. And that should add up to an England win.
Okay, well, we'll hold you to that, Steve, as always.
Yeah.
So we've had some good predictions there. So we've got a prediction on the Australia-India, sorry, and we've got a England-Sri Lanka prediction as well. So an away win and a home win. The home win to obviously Australia, away win to England. So we'll chat about that again. That'll be brilliant. So any final thoughts? Any further thoughts?
Well, it's great to have some really high quality Test cricket. As we spoke about last week, there were some great games going on in New Zealand and the games in South Africa between South Africa and Sri Lanka as well. Yeah. And I think it's great that the games are able to take place. Yeah. There's obviously nervousness around, COVID outbreaks and people kind of behaving themselves in biosecure bubbles and all of that sort of thing. So I think it's a great credit to the players that they're giving us so much cricket to enjoy, or about to give us cricket to enjoy. Just look forward to enjoying the games that are coming up. And Australia and India has been an absolutely phenomenal series. It's an epic. It's a brilliant advert for Test cricket. England, Sri Lanka, some new faces around the England team that will want to make an impression. Some people who aren't there maybe be nervously wondering. Rory Burns, for example, is not touring. I think his wife is having a baby. So if Zach Crawley, who obviously scored a double 100 last summer, batting at number 3, if he comes in and does well at the top of the order, and Bairstow does well at number 3, Burns had a relatively lean time in the English summer last year. Would he get back in the team for later tours, etc.? So there's a fair bit of interest in this England tour as well. Though it's only 2 tests and they're both in Galle, I think there's plenty to look out for. And it'll be really interesting to see how they balance their side without Ben Stokes.
Yeah, brilliant. That's going to be fantastic. So some great golf to look for. Cricket to look. Sorry, I think about something else. Great cricket to look forward to. There's been some great cricket already, and there's going to be some great cricket to look forward to. So, thank you, Steve, for all your thoughts. Been a pleasure. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Just let us know. This is, like I said, our first show. For looking back on the week that's gone and looking forward to the week that's ahead with the cricket. So let us know what your thoughts are. What do you think? Do you think that there's going to be a home win for Australia, an away win for England? And what's your thoughts on the Big Bash? And all the English players that are there. As anyone who stands out for you, any thoughts about the English team? Let us all know. We love loads of questions. I know Steve loves to answer them as well. So, yeah, we hope you engage with us. If you're listening to this on the podcast, thank you so much, and leave some comments. And we're going to be here every week. So, unless we tell you different, and we may do some extra ones as the weeks go by. But for now, we'll be here every week. And so join us next week, next Wednesday, 8 p.m., where we'll look back on the things we've talked about, see how English guys have done bowling and batting in the Big Bash, and we'll see what happens in the final test of the India and Australia, and see if the Australians can control themselves and contain themselves and play some great cricket, and India can go away with a sweet taste in their mouth rather than a bitter one. And let's see how the England team do away in Sri Lanka. So I look forward to all, Steve. Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining. And anybody who's joining, thank you for joining us for this. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for watching